Hey there, welcome to PeopleSoft channel. This is your PeopleSoft friend Max, and today we are starting a new series about reporting in PeopleSoft system using PSQuery. So reporting is a critical requirement of business, which helps the key leaders to make day-to-day decisions for their growth of the business. To meet this requirement, PeopleSoft comes up with various reporting tools, and PSQuery is one of these tools, which is a very basic yet very useful and powerful reporting tool. In this episode, we will go about having some overview about reporting in general, and we will start about basic introduction to PSQuery. So I hope you are excited to learn, and let's start with reporting. If you are someone who is new to the world of reporting, you might be wondering, what does this word reporting mean? You can think of reporting as a process of collecting the data from various sources as per the business requirement, then transforming the data if required, and finally providing this transformed data into meaningful information to the business so that they can get what information they want, and based upon this information they can make key decisions in their day-to-day activities. Let me help you understand this concept with an example. Let's say we have our manager John who works in an accounts payable team, and their team takes care of creating the vouchers in PeopleSoft system and making payment of these vouchers so that the supplier will get their money. Now, suppose John came to know that last month there are few vouchers which were supposed to be paid, however, they did not get paid. So now John needs to know all of these vouchers whose due date was in last month, but they did not went through payment. In that case, he can create a request for reporting team by providing them as much details as possible for his request. So based upon his request, the reporting team will create some SQL which will fetch the data from various tables, like we have voucher table, we have payment table, we have payment accept table. And finally, based upon the requirement, they will create an Excel and provide this Excel to John. This is the report that the reporting will provide to John based upon his specific requirement. So that's reporting. And this report will help John not only to see all the vouchers, but he can immediately work with his team to issue a repayment for all of these missed vouchers. This is just one example, but in a big business in day-to-day life, business needs all sorts of reports from their reporting team. So these are the various reporting tools which can be used with a PeopleSoft system. So first and foremost, we have PSQuery. That is a very basic reporting tool based upon SQL and drag and drop functionality, which makes our SQL preparation work quite faster. Then we have BI Publisher, and this tool can use to generate wide variety of output format, which a PSQuery cannot do. Next, we have SQR, or it stands for Structured Query Report. So SQR is a kind of programming language which has the benefit of SQL, but also the programming language constructs which helps to restrict or manipulate the data based upon certain logic. Hence, SQR becomes one of the most powerful tools, as it has not only a benefit of SQL, but also a benefit of programming to add certain logic. Then we have Envision and Preston reports. So these typically are more richer formats of the reports, and these are often used in financial reporting when using a PeopleSoft system. Later, we have Cognos reports. So Cognos is a IBM built functionality, and it can be also integrated with PeopleSoft. And finally, we have OBIEE, which stands for Oracle Business Intelligence Enterprise Edition. It's a Oracle reporting tool. However, this can also be integrated with PeopleSoft system for reporting purpose. So this is just a list of wide range of reporting tools available to work with PeopleSoft. And now let's start our journey about PSQuery. So let's log into our PeopleSoft account. In order to access PSQuery, click on this icon at the top right. Let's click on Navigator folder. Scroll down until you see a folder called as Reporting Tools. So click on Reporting Tools, click on Query, and now you are inside the PSQuery folder. So PSQuery has these three elements: Query Manager, Query Viewer, and Schedule Query. So let's understand these three elements in a crisp format. So Query Manager, as the name suggests, it is manager for your query. That means it can do almost everything for your query. So you can create a query, you can modify an existing query, you can rename the query, you can copy the query to someone. So all these kind of activities can be done via Query Manager. The second option we have is Query Viewer. So unlike Query Manager, you cannot do all that stuff. The only stuff you can do with Query Viewer is you can simply run a query that's assigned to you. So if there is someone who is working as a developer or a business analyst, then he would usually have access to Query Manager because his responsibilities would involve creating and managing a query. On the other hand, if we have a business user whose only requirement is to run a report, in that case, he would not have access of Query Manager. He would only have access to Query Viewer where he can go and run the report. A third option is Schedule Query. So this is an interesting option and it saves our effort to run a query multiple times as per the requirement. Now, we discussed a use case where the reporting team provided a voucher unpaid report to John. Now, John thought that report to be very useful and he thought, how about this? How about the reporting team could send him this report on every first day of the month? Well, in that case, the reporting team do not need to run the report manually. As they have already prepared a query, they can use this schedule query option so that the report will run automatically on first day of every month and John will have the report in his mailbox. So that's the scheduled query option. Now let's start our journey with the Query Manager. To understand the basics of report creation process, let's consider this use case. So we have a report request from procurement team to prepare a report for all the dispatch purchase orders for business unit US 001 and for supplier SCM 00000001. And they have given that the report should have these minimum set of fields which will provide them crucial information about dispatch purchase order. So in this episode, we are going to create a report for this particular use case. So whenever we need to create a new report, we should be aware about the correct SQL table name or SQL view name which we can use for our report. In this case, we can get the data required from the PO header table. So if we are creating a query on a typical SQL developer tool, then we can write a SQL query like this, where we will give the criteria of the business unit, PO ID, and vendor ID or supplier ID. And if we hit run button, we can get the required data as per the user requirement. Now let's see how we can create such a report in PSQuery. In order to create a new report, let's click on Create New Query. And this will take you to the Query Manager wizard. Now, the first thing we need to do while starting our report creation process is selecting the records. So if you check this tab, we have this several tabs which are nothing but the building blocks of our query. And the very first tab is records, because we need to have at least one record in our query to prepare the report. As we have discussed, we will get the required information from the PO header table. So you can start typing the record name and you can click on search. You are searching by record name. And once you click on search, it will show you all the matching results. For example, we have this 6 records which are starting with PO header. Now for each result, you have 2 options. The first one is to add this record to our query. That means we will use this record in our query. And the second one is show fields options. Now, oftentimes you may not be sure if this is the correct record and whether you should include it in your query. In that case, you can click on this show fields link and it will just show you all the fields along with their key information which are part of this record. As you can see, we have 98 fields in this record and this helps us to have a quick pick into the record fields. So once you are sure that this is the correct record, you can click on the return and you can add this record. Now the next step involves selecting the fields. So as user has already given us the list of fields, you can select the field from this checkbox. So let's say we need a business unit, PO ID, and we need origin, which is here. We need a buyer ID, which is this one. Then we need the enter date. So let's search for enter date, which is this field. Then we need the PO status field. It should be here at the top. Then we need the supplier information, supplier set ID and supplier ID. So these are the 2 required fields. Then we need dispatch method, which is this one. And the last required field is the activity date. So you can scroll down and we have the required field activity date at the bottom. You have selected the list of your required fields. Now, if you go to the Fields tab, you will see all the fields that you have selected so far. So we have selected these 10 fields from the PO header record. Now, if you click on View SQL, it will show you the SQL which the query manager has automatically prepared for you based upon the fields that you have selected. Now, if you click on Run button, it will directly run the query and the query will be unrestricted because we have not given any criteria. That means we are simply returning these 10 fields for all the transactions in this table. That's why when you click on Run, it gives you all the transactions from your purchase order header table. However, we have a requirement that we need this data only for BU US001 for a particular supplier and the status of the PO should be dispatched. In order to add these restrictions to your query, go to Criteria. Now here you can see no criteria has been added. That's the default state when you start creating a new query. So let's add our first criteria. So if we click on Add Criteria, we can see this Edit Criteria Properties, which has this top section here and the bottom section here. So we usually have these 2 sections for comparison. For example, if I want to say that PO status should be equal to D, that means dispatch, then the PO status will come in the top section and its comparison value D will come at the bottom section. So let's add our first criteria that PO status should be dispatched. So since we are comparing a field with a value on the expression 1, they will select it to be field. And then let's click on this magnifying glass. Here it is showing all the fields from the first record, which is the purchase order header. Right? Now let's select this PO status. And now in the expression 1 or in the top section, we have PO status. Now our requirement is that PO status should be equal to D. That means dispatched. So in the condition type, you can see we have multiple options available. But now let's select equal to. And now since we need to provide a constant value in the expression 2 or in the bottom section of this comparison, let's select constant and let's enter your value. So for dispatch, we have a value T in the PO status. Let's click on OK. And as you can see in the criteria, we have our first restriction to our query to include only dispatched purchase order. Let's click on View SQL. You can see the first restrictions. And now let's click on Run. And you can see the number of results has been reduced because of these restrictions. And we can have only dispatch purchase order now. Let's add another 2 restrictions. So let's again go to criteria. Let's click on Add criteria. Now this time let's add the business unit should be US 001. So from the left select field because we have this field called as business unit in the table. Let's select it from here. Again we have a constant value which is US 001. So it should be equal to constant of US 001. Let's click on OK and then let's click on View SQL. You can see the restriction has been added. Now let's add another restriction for the supplier ID. So let's click on Add criteria. We are selecting a field. Let's select the field and the field is vendor ID, which is right here on the bottom section of this comparison, which is expression 2, select a constant and which is equal to SCN 00000001. Now hit it on OK. Now these are the 3 restrictions as we required. Click on View SQL to make sure that the SQL is generating. The SQL looks good. If you click on Run, now you can see we have only 36 rows of data as we had in the SQL developer, and the query is now giving us the correct transactions as required. So congratulations on preparing your first PSQuery report. So if we have tested the report and if it is working fine, it's a good practice to save your report. So let's see how to save your PSQuery. You can click anywhere apart from the Run tab. And in this bottom, you would see the option called Save or Save As. So let's click on Save. And this will open the Save wizard for your query. So let's provide some information such as the query description folder and a long description if required. It is always a good practice to give a query definition a meaningful description, because if we have multiple PS queries which are similar in nature and which are a bit complex, then query definition will help you to understand what the query is doing. Now we have this option called as owner. By default, you can see that it is private. That means if I am creating a query, it will stay only with me and nobody else will be able to see unless I copy this query to their operating ID. However, we also have this option called as public. So if I select it to be public, then all the active people in PeopleSoft system will be able to search for this query and will be able to run this query. For now, tutorial purpose, let's select this as public so that any person in my system can use the query. And then we can see that we have now the query name and description for our query. So when we click on Run, we get to see the output in this HTML form. However, we can also download the output in the Excel format. So let's click on this Download to Excel button. Download it. And this is the report from my desktop. As you can see, the report now available in Excel format. Once you download it in Excel format, the first cell will have your report name. This will you that this report is output of this PeopleSoft query. And in the second tab, you will have a row count. That means this report, as of now, when it was downloaded, has 36 rows of data. Let me also quickly show you how you can use Query Viewer to view and run this report. So let's get the query name from here and let's return to search. Click on the navigator, let's click on reporting tools and let's click on Query Viewer. Viewer page, and as we expect, the procurement guys will be business users, so they will have an access to this query viewer. They can search for this report name, and as it's a public size query, then this report is available for everyone. Now, if they need to run this report online, they can click on this Run on HTML and it will show them the report as expected. However, if they need this report in, let's say, Excel spreadsheet, or a comma separate file or an Excel file, they can select the appropriate option here and the system will provide them the report as expected. One to note is that, as we had discussed earlier, with Query Viewer, you can only search for the query and you can run it, and that's the only thing you can do. You cannot create a new query from here, or you cannot edit an existing query from here. If you have access to this query manager, you can edit the existing query. For example, let's take this query and let's go back to query manager. And if I need to make changes to this query, I will search for this query, I will hit enter, and as you can see, the edit option is there in query manager. However, it is not there in query viewer. So that's a major difference between query manager and query viewer. On that note, we conclude episode 1 of PSQuery reporting, and I hope you had a fun creating this simple report with me. We will continue our tutorial series in which we will create some more complicated reports, in which we will see how the PSQuery works and how to use the PSQuery elements to create effective reports. See you in the next episode. Thank you guys.